if the world does it to you long enough and effectively enough, you begin to do it to yourself. You become a collaborator, an accomplice of your own murderers, because you believe the same things they do. They think it's important to be white, and you think it's important to be white. They think it is shameful to be black, and you think it is shameful to be black. And you have no corroboration around you of any other sense of life. You know.
I want to talk about how white America has forced us to look at light-skinnedness. Happy Black History Month. We've always known, especially within the black community, that there was just something about being a lighter-skinned black individual that felt inherently better. Even if you never subscribe to that notion, even if you know that the police are just as likely to shoot them as they are you. Multiple avenues, thanks to white supremacy, have illustrated that having lighter skin among African Americans will play a factor in you both being desired by multiple people of various ethnicities and backgrounds and living a better life in this country. No, this is not the fault of said individuals that were born a complexion lighter than milk chocolate. It is, as you can imagine, the fault of the capitalism-loving bourgeoisie responsible for dividing the poor and the lower class into controllable chunks with the invention of whiteness the moment freed black slaves brought a sort of eat the rich vibe to the work class that they didn't really like. And over the course of time, the case of the concept of whiteness being the fault of this particular problem has been proven to be constantly enforced through multiple junctions. However, none seem to be the bigger perpetrator in showing that lighter skin among black folk is more desired among the culture we have to share with white supremacist capitalism, and how that focus has given multiple black minds mental trauma and just keeps getting stacked on top of each other every generation than mainstream media via pop culture. It's definitely happened beforehand thanks to assault, affairs, and ability during our time as slaves, but the once taboo notion didn't start to become popularized or given capitalistic benefit until it started to affect pop culture. Because it's through the medium of novelized fiction, specifically smut, published smut, that has helped create the careers of a lot of light-skinned black individuals that, despite their talent they have or developed in their appropriate field, has their pretty privilege amplified to I don't need a credit score levels of success because of said skin. Whether the genetic involvement of white folk was implemented when male plantation owners got horny, or you were the first of your line to be light-skinned because your parents decided to mix one's cream with another's coffee. Soon, it got to the point where light-skinned black folk began to cater to the world's eventual love of ethnically diverse and racially ambiguous features without having to acknowledge the blackness nestled within, because the constant act of whiteness putting light-skinned members of non-white ethnicities on pedestals both showed and proved to us that thanks to it physically and visually being closer to whiteness, that it is more palatable in ways I plan on sharing in this video. So much that it perpetuates the fetishization that white society still has with darker skin. It continues to corrode communities by second-handedly injecting thoughts and prejudice and colorism to eat away at their foundation. And if you couldn't already tell from the thumbnail, it stops traditionally dark-skinned characters from being portrayed by dark-skinned actors for the sake of white comfortability, all while pushing light-skinned, racially ambiguous features in pop culture and media for the exact same thing. I'm not saying there aren't shows and movies that exist that find black talent out there to combat that trend, nor am I ignoring that they exist. I'm just making it known that this is usually the case when things like this happen, regardless if the decision to do so is conscious or not. But it's like I said earlier, readers, slave plantation sexual assault aside, there's a pop culture progenitor in regards to how light-skin privilege has grown as strong as it is now, and that progenitor was created in 1919, before the release of its movie 2 years later. My fellow bi-sissy Princess Weeks summed it up in her video about the subject. When you've heard the term tall, dark, and handsome, a lot of the time it's being used to refer to someone who isn't actually a man of color. It has traditionally been a person with dark hair and eyes, maybe tan skin. Dark, in this context, is in comparison to fair, pale, blonde, maybe a redhead. Now she goes on to explain that the reason why the terminology started to shift away from men that didn't look like Hitler Youth and more toward pointy-hat Spanish native human familiar is mostly thanks to an Italian actor named Rudolph Valentino, who was known for playing mysterious yet racially ambiguous characters. And considering one of said racially ambiguous characters he played was the famous Sheik from the progenitor of Harlequin smut novels, The Sheik, it was clear that adding melanated skin to the list of what qualified as tall, dark, and handsome the moment his performance of the Sheik got the panties wet of every white housewife trapped in an atomic family was the move. The appeal of darker skin on individuals who still either latched onto or had a firm grasp of the concept of whiteness allowed individuals of the Caucasian persuasion to comfortably explore where their racism ends and their fetishizations begin. Tall, dark, and handsome, as it had been transformed into thanks to Valentino, allowed white women to look at the low-status white folk called the Spanish, Arabs with genetic ties to Europe, and even the white offspring of an occupied India as sexy, mysterious, forbidden fruit that they wanted to taste at least once in their lifetime. And in both that pursuit and that daydream, it opened a door that allowed them to explore the sexual fetishization of an ethnic group that has to deal with colorism thanks to previous European occupation and colonization, without having to compromise on being with someone without access to whiteness. This meet in the middle has generated a lot of white folk that love to bask in the ability to say, I can't be racist. Look who my partner is. Because now they think they don't have to actually interact with someone of the same ethnicity that's darker than their book cover boyfriend. Instead, they get kudo care points by proxy just for being with him. But I have to emphasize that the very important bit of this is that this exploration was only possible for those individuals because at the end of the day, there was a connection of whiteness present. Colorism has existed in multiple melanated countries and colonies and cultures prior to European and Mongol colonization, and I guarantee you that these vanilla bitches wouldn't have made a move on them the moment they realized that they don't believe in insurance claims. No, this can only work if these individuals are reformed into their self-appointed and perfected society, because according to them, their way is still the best way. They will be declared a hero that did their country and their culture a great service by showing that this individual that has just the right amount of melanin for them to be seen as exotic and mysterious can be shown true culture and a form of prosperity via romantic re-education by their soft and sophisticated snowy superior. Meanwhile, if either said individual or a darker man of that same culture and group the lighter-skinned individual is part of successfully convinced the white wallflower to give up her European-based culture and superiority to live among those who are properly black and brown with cultures that have no ties to global white supremacy at all, she will be considered either brainwashed by savages, a traitor to the established order, or multiple variants of whore. Shit, sometimes they experience all three at the same time. That is, if she doesn't use her whiteness in time to circumvent receiving such criticism from her white peers to save her reputation in white supremacy by claiming said intercourse was the result of non-consensual sexual assault a la Birth of a Nation, or that one bald-headed bitch responsible for the death of Emmett Till. So, because those who develop a taste for this slightly evolved version of tall, dark, and handsome care more about making sure they keep access to their white privilege membership card, they compromise by making sure the man with only a drop or two of color in their skin can either be easily molded or coerced by European social and beauty standards, or already operates within them fully. Whether it's because they're trying to personally yet impossibly accomplish that same amount of privilege for themselves, or they acknowledge that this is a game that must be played to a certain degree in order to survive in said European social and beauty standards, is up to them. But in order to seek that out, especially without having to go out of the country where they could experience both more real and dangerous versions of the story elements like and similar to the chic, those who had that itch to scratch regardless of gender, sex, and sexuality said, "We got easy mode jungle fever at home," and looked to the country's population of black folk, Muslim folk, Indian, Native American, and Latin folk. Lighter-skinned individuals from ethnic groups who, thanks to experiences that may or may not have supplied years of trauma onto said individuals, depending on how they arrived to this country, have either a desire for or generational ties to whiteness engraved in them since birth. Because if they already suffer under the thumb of white supremacy, they can be easily molded to fit the desires of the dominant socioeconomic ethnic group that white supremacy is initially made for. They don't have to worry about them and other members of their ethnicity suddenly participating in a dance and chant native to their culture as protest to white privilege in action, because white privilege is all that they know and will call such display unprofessional, uncivilized, or barbaric. And because they end up being favored by said socioeconomic ethnic group that white supremacy is made for, those darker-skinned individuals attached to the same ethnicity as the lighter-skinned one will see said treatment in the same light that prejudice and systemic racism has been standing under ever since dark-skinned folk were forced to be seen as actual people, let alone citizens of this country. In the end, tall, dark, and handsome, according to white privilege, has in fact evolved to be more reflective on what counts in the parameters of dark. But in return, this sense of control regarding what counts as dark within said parameters is just as strict and restrictive as when white folks first came up with the term. Thanks to racism and capitalism being damn near inseparable, white folk, at least in America, succeeded in both establishing white supremacist roots regarding why the lighter and darker skinned individuals among historically melanated ethnicities constantly have beef with each other, and realizing the appeal among their own enough to see how this can be utilized to its fullest. Now that this iteration of tall, dark, and handsome was no longer seen as taboo, the commonality of seeing lighter-skinned individuals of certain ethnicities brought about a false sense of societal acceptance. As I stated earlier, if a white woman has a light-skinned black husband, she has the privilege to deflect any fetishization or superiority complex passed down from her plantation owner ancestors, all because her being with him is visual proof that she's not racist. Not only does that logic allow people to see these light-skinned individuals as the main visual and potentially desirable representatives of our races and ethnicities, but also that, thanks to America's influence, the visual depiction of individuals with only certain degrees of melanin become more coveted overall on a global scale. If there has to be a black man to serve focus in this ad, it should be a light-skinned one. It'll show that we're allies to black Americans, but it won't give our white customers an immediate heart attack when they see it because he's only dark enough to be socially enticing. I just wanted to make sure that you heard my quotes because I wasn't going to be doing this all fucking day. This is the mentality and the propaganda that kind of made a significant portion of the world think that dark-skinned individuals weren't attractive, real talk. Seeing South Koreans who have been obsessed with European beauty standards for years finally see and understand the beauty behind African skin and facial features because they watched Black Panther 1 when it was originally released in theaters was absolutely wild to me. Meanwhile, some of us that are that shade or darker are either envious of said controlled acceptance by proxy or try to accomplish something similar to what they have access to in spite of their dark-skinned handicap. And thanks to the facade of racism almost being over this time, we promise you, the latter try to bring more to the table because they don't have lighter skin, like being able to actively participate in capitalistic white supremacy, for example. Society, in one way or another, teaches them to never see or acknowledge both the inner and outer beauty of Black women, and they basically have to work twice as hard to become romantically attractive to white women. And because capitalism loves the equation more able bodies plus their potential work ethic equals more profit, they find ways to push those ways of producing more of those individuals other white folk want to comfortably covet over. The whole era of fight racism, have mixed babies that came from is kind of proof of that. So now that we have this divide in skin tone shades that was originally brought about by fetishization and control, how does it affect people within those communities in ways other than what I previously mentioned? Well, if I can use Gen X Black actors as an example, it makes actors like Michael Ealy become extremely popular among both Black and white audiences just off his looks alone. Meanwhile, Taye Diggs, for example, sees these opportunities that Michael is getting just by being handsomely hazel-eyed and hay-colored and is envious of that. So while Michael Ealy probably already learned at a young age that the violation performed by his slave owner ancestor responsible for existence is the reason why he was getting all this play by white America at the time, Taye Diggs never did. So he proceeded to work hard in order to secure his place at the table, because Ealy probably didn't have to work that hard for his place. And to celebrate him finally doing so, he married Idina Menzel. Allegedly. Now, while that last bit can be taken as a joke, you wouldn't believe how many Black men exist who actually look up to that method of making it. Because white privilege has hyped it up for the longest time, the various variants of lighter skin tones serve as the passing points of the paper bag tests we use among our own kind. Thanks to white society making us think that their traits are more desirable thanks to their initial fetishizations of us, we can't help but let the praise of their appearance actively lower our self-esteem the longer we're exposed to it. Whether it's watching your Black girlfriend swoon over Jesse Williams every time he shows up in Grey's Anatomy, or noticing that all of the heroic love interests in Tyler Perry's first phase of plays were light-skinned Black men as opposed to the dark-skinned villains in them. It is incredibly noticeable how much society has shaped that even when it comes to Black women, lighter skin is just as desirable in their own communities. It's through that we as African Americans develop a dysmorphia over our own masculinity, femininity, and Blackness. Hegemonic masculinity is tied to the very fabric of capitalism so well that some of the feminine, even the ones who know the familiar cologne of patriarchy enter the hallway, constantly expect the work ethic and mental fortitude that was set by the same patriarchy they fight for their Black partner. Because for the umpteenth time, just because it's called patriarchy doesn't mean it only affects the male and the masculine. Keep that in mind. But this is one of the factors that has proven to play a role in black men either not being interested in black women or using marrying a white woman as a gold trophy for success. And it's one that has splintered and mutated to be present in multiple circles. Black male anime nerds who don't believe in hair lineups, always having the urge to gatekeep black women out of their specific fandoms via knowledge, trivia, and dedication, but always takes the word of the white girl that looks exactly like Orihime. And I mean exactly. And before you say anything, yes, the black gaming communities are the exact same way. Even the black manosphere brain rotters follow a similar doctrine in their quest to get dark-skinned individuals to quote-unquote succeed in ways that get them better acclimated to white privilege than their light-skinned kinfolk. And would you look at that? Most of them involve the reinforcement of disrespecting black women while considering white women as nothing but the trophy that they won. How about that? So when we say that white privilege is justification for allowing white folk to practice jungle fever like they did, damn near indoctrinating those of us darker than what traditionally counts as light skin nowadays into practicing prejudice among our own kind, we actually mean it. It's not something that lighter skinned individuals can help, don't get me wrong. But we, as darker skinned black people, see them benefit in ways a lot of us have to work harder for just because whiteness deemed them worthy of being closer to it than we'll ever be, regardless if either parties decide to work hard to get in that proximity or not. And if that's how dark-skinned individuals have been handling this indoctrination, imagine how actual light-skinned black folk are handling the fact that the white people that they regularly hang around with only want them there because they're a security blanket. Not only are they the token black out of this group of one POC per 3 white people, but they are now the token black that has been deemed both safer and more socially acceptable to be around because their skin tone has a closer proximity to whiteness than others. Because of this, a lot of lighter-skinned black people are exposed to a lot of racist and prejudice spoken out loud thoughts from their white peers. White folk don't mind casually saying the N-word in front of them because they don't find them threatening enough to not do that around. Hearing a lot of the more liberally accurate versions of "I can't believe black people live like this," or "black people need to stop being so lazy to make something of themselves" whenever a topic of civil rights and social issues surrounding minorities comes into the conversation. Knowing that you're only getting the attention that you're getting right now because you're their current outlet for them to explore their mild obsession with blackness safely, without the judgment that could come from their kinfolk if your skin was darker than a caramel chew. But for some of them, that doesn't matter. As long as their current connection to whiteness is maintained, they don't care. And for a lot of darker skinned black folk who got proximity to whiteness off merit, as long as theirs is also maintained, they could give two shits either. They already got theirs in one way or another. And because there are black men who actually think this way, light, medium, and dark skin, Jesus Christ, this tells me that the real culprit for all of this is the white supremacy primary taproot that the likes of patriarchy, capitalism, and both prejudice and racism are attached to. Why yes, I did just cite a past work of mine in my own video, thank you for asking. Speaking of capitalism, it was only a matter of time before it found a way to involve itself in this ridiculous experiment. And if you were paying attention to a few of the examples I gave earlier in this statement, you kind of already know a couple of the industries that played around in it. So for some of you, what I'm about to describe shouldn't really be that surprising. For the others though, buckle up. On Christmas Day in 1745, Nanan, the 17-year-old African slave of French Guadeloupe colonizer Georges Boulogne de Saint-Georges, gave birth to his son, Joseph. George acknowledged Joseph as his own and gave the baby his surname before having to flee from Guadeloupe to France so his star rating could fall down back to 0. Then, when Joseph turned 7, his dad brought him to live with him in Paris, France to train in music. By the time he was 30, Joseph had not only become both an excellent violinist and fencer, but turned the Concert des Amateurs upon his promotion to conductor into, according to French composer Jean-Benjamin Delaborde, the best orchestra for symphonies in Paris and perhaps all of Europe. Despite being recognized nowadays as the Black Mozart, Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, thanks to his artistic contributions to the 18th century, was one of the first racially ambiguous pop culture icons in recorded history. Now, all that's actually changed between how racially ambiguous white folks have been looked at back in the day versus how they're looked at now is, once again, how open white folks have been regarding wanting to enjoy the company of a black and brown person, but with most of the seasonings taken off to satisfy their sub-above bland-ass palate. Like, what do you mean salt is too spicy? What the fuck are you talking about? That curiosity turned into fetishization, and they learned it can be used as a shield to deflect allegations of racism. Meanwhile, most of that racism slides off said shields and sloppily lands in our own communities. It seeps into our soil. We absorb its nutrients by eating the crops that we unknowingly grew in that soil, and we slowly yet surely begin to naturally reinforce colorism in ways reflecting prejudice capitalism that we never did before. The difference is that back then, the rate at which this was being pushed and popular was incredibly lower than it is today. It probably wasn't until both the novel and the film adaptation of The Sheik came out and Valentino's brown-faced performance made white women want to try leg and thigh for the first time in their lives that the appeal for more racially ambiguous folks started to truly take off. As you can imagine, the growth of this meant less and less white folk were being impacted by the stigma of enjoying the art, work, or existence of an individual that, despite whatever their ties to whiteness is not or only just white. So if whiteness is to thrive, adding a well-maintained, properly working swirl machine that serves both soft serve and frozen yogurt in the lunchroom became a necessity. This is why Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, received a different racially ambiguous star experience than the likes of, let's say, Guns N' Roses' Slash. Yes, white rock music gatekeeper that doesn't do his own research on his faves and just goes on vibes. He is half black. Now, were there white individuals back in the day that didn't like Joseph Boulogne because he was black? Yes, there were. Always will be. Those individuals actively called him mulatto in a derogatory fashion because he was a mixed-race offspring of a black African mother and a white French father. But because of how light his skin was and how he was regularly depicted in paintings and whatnot, Joseph Boulogne was racially ambiguous enough to everyone else who didn't either actively know his mother was black or know what features to look for to show that there was more in his genetics than the, at the time, traditional European features that other white Frenchmen didn't have. Because that's what racial ambiguity means, either having a racial background that not everyone can immediately pinpoint based on which two or more ethnicities were combined to create someone, or has said features and traits usually associated with one race despite being born from parents of a single race. And while nobody is ignoring or collectively demeaning the latter when it comes to what's considered racial ambiguity, it's the ones who are the combination of two or more ethnicities thanks to the genetics of the father and his background and the mother and her background that usually end up getting the play in regards to representation. Because at the end of the day, it's whatever hint of something else that's present in individuals who would be deemed racially ambiguous that seem to slowly gravitate toward them, becoming incredibly popular among a majority white audience on top of whatever talent that they possess. While it's still debatable if Babe Ruth factored into racial ambiguity regarding whether or not he was black, according to the one drop rule, 3 prominent examples of multi-race celebrities that are well known for being racially ambiguous enough to cater to white folk despite one of their parents being completely black are the American actor Vin Diesel, rock guitarist Slash, as I previously mentioned, and the late Disney Channel star Cameron Boyce. The late and latter is actually an exemplary example in this case, because at first glance, everyone just immediately assumed that he was monoracial, that he was just white. The internet was literally in a state of confusion when it was revealed that he was biracial with a black father and a white Jewish mother. And because he had the talent, the face, and was born with the complexion of his mother, Disney pushed him as much as they could during his short-lived career in film and television, specifically because he checked off a lot of their boxes. He had the skin tone and facial features to not alienate white viewers, the talent and work ethic required to be a standalone star, and he could also be an icon for racial equality and all the kumbaya shit that white liberals like to rally behind if either people found out about his black dad and white mom, or he chose to expose his fans to his personal life. Cameron Boyce, God rest his soul, was one of the best individuals Disney could both push and apply this concept on with their roster of Zoomer talent at the time. And considering she's also a biracial and racially ambiguous Zoomer, it goes without saying that thanks to patriarchy, that he would have been just as successful, maybe even more successful, as Zendaya is if he were alive today. Now, keep in mind that Cameron Boyce was not the only ambiguous individual that film and media has done this to within the entertainment industry. After all, this practice is the reason why Vin Diesel is a household name. Like, his mother is white, who, according to his stepfather, has a thing for smart black dudes, and that context clue is kind of the only thing Diesel is willing to share with the public about not just the ethnicity, but also the identity of his biological father. But that doesn't stop his facial features or his skin tone adding to whatever he brought to Hollywood talent and work ethic-wise for people to start noticing him and using his racial ambiguity to their advantage. However, if you have ever questioned if Vin Diesel is enough of a hetero-romantic heartthrob to be given the tall, dark, and handsome 2.0 treatment, I'm here to tell you something very important. You see, by the time Vin Diesel was about to be a household name, racism and capitalism had already learned that the concept, if slightly altered, doesn't have to only cater to women. It can cater to men's inner desires, egos, and self-confidence, just like bodybuilder turned action star Arnold Schwarzenegger did for a lot of insecure white boys with body dysmorphia during the early to mid 1970s. And while us black folk had Robbie Robinson, the Black Prince himself from 1975 onwards, it was never him that was placed in front of the window for the other passersby to oogle at. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger, especially when he became an action star. Thanks to his skin tone being able to pass the paper bag test with flying colors, and his willingness to toss his sense of culture into the great melting pot in order to become American, he became the center of attention in both of those niches for the longest time. And because of this, it caused a lot of black Americans into bodybuilding to only be exposed to someone that doesn't represent them via mainstream media, both ethnically and culturally. If this were a fair world, Robbie Robinson would be just as famous and revered as Arnold Schwarzenegger. But unfortunately, we live in a time and a country where people think modern-day black names are too ghetto and that black African names are too hard to pronounce, but expects everyone to know the difference between the Sarsgaards and the Skarsgards and have no problem with there being 17 different variants of McKaylee. I say all of that to say, because eventually capitalism realized that if you isolate minorities, you make less money. But they struggled with an execution for that realization for the longest time, because if they found a minority representative to cater to their audience and then suddenly sprung them on their white audience, that will be the equivalent of someone shrieking in fear when somebody turns off the bright ass lights in their bedroom while they're still in it. So how do they utilize the concept of celebrity to draw in more people, specifically Black, Brown, and other POC, without suddenly scaring, disappointing, and losing their white prioritized audience? Enter the arrival of the racially ambiguous action star of the early 2000s, the most prominent and popular being Vin Diesel. After he got in the game, movie execs realized his skin was light enough to not immediately scare off the genre's white audience, and saw the positive reaction he was making with the cis-het male/masculine fan base within said audience. To white male-presenting men who sought Schwarzenegger-level action movies as a means to scratch their itches revolving around their personal relationships with ego, self-confidence, and envy, the combo of Vin Diesel's facial features driving out a rugged, gruff type of handsomeness, along with his highly desired, chiseled yet dehydrated physique across both sex and gender that was amplified by his slightly melanated skin, served as a very effective cooling balm. This is why Vin Diesel is an action star. This is why he's Riddick, this is why he's Dom Toretto, and this is why he's Xander Cage. He caters to the image of how men should think of themselves according to patriarchal society in a way that non-white men can still appreciate, because his background clearly has more condiments in it than salt, pepper, and mayonnaise. But at the same time, the presence of the other spices doesn't steer the targeted demographic away, because the salt, pepper, and mayonnaise still exists within the dish. Matter of fact, thanks to the release of Fast 9 and the Fast Saga in 2021, officially casting John Cena's whole milk ass as his little brother, Jacob Toretto, of which they canonically share the same mother and father, sometimes the other obvious spices in the dish in question are completely ignored, just to let the salt, pepper, and mayonnaise hog the spotlight. No shade to John Cena though. This is also why, outside of that one time he played an Italian mobster in 2006, you always see him bald-headed instead of with his natural C3/4A hair he used to rock during his modeling days. Both his low bald fade buzz cuts and the clean shaves he's known for rocking in his movies makes him more marketable to white eyes, because they feel more comfortable and less embarrassed or ashamed about publicly being into someone with black hair textures. Lord knows I like to touch him though. You might not think this is an efficient play when it comes to non-white celebrities or public figures seeking a majority white fan base, but it's actually more popular of a move than you think, especially if they meet the melanin and facial feature requirements to actually benefit from being racially ambiguous. Because as long as whiteness is present, even if it's obvious, the concept will remain popular enough to be effective. But eventually, the realization that the presence of individuals darker than what's currently allowed within the proximity of whiteness's tall, dark, and handsome fetish is inevitable will start seeping in, especially when it comes to pop culture. I know, because I've seen it happen to two of the most famous dark-skinned African-American superheroes in American comic books. Not racially ambiguous, not light-skinned, but African-American characters that were intentionally created with dark skin. So famous that they're not just known across America, but on a global scale. So now that you know how the fetishization of selected black skin and bodies is perpetuated across America, and how these actions influence how the rest of the world possibly looks at black skin and bodies as a result, can you guess how whiteness chose to depict these two famous dark-skinned black comic book characters in question? Please allow me. White people have the most control over how minorities are represented. And we know this because situations and opportunities have popped up countless times that have proven that if they have a say in the matter, white folk will make sure that whatever representation black folks get will either be in the form of a controllable dark-skinned black man or a more approachable light-skinned black man. Call back to my previous example. If there has to be a black man to serve focus in this ad, it should be a light-skinned one. It'll show that we're allies to black Americans, but it won't give our white customers an immediate heart attack when they see it because he's only dark enough to be socially enticing. Oh god, I thought I left my caricature days behind me. Should I bring back Huck? This is because accepting the stigma with the modern day utilization of tall, dark, and handsome was way more popular than making white folk feel ashamed that they dipped their tongue in the jungle juice from time to time. Upon them doing so, a lot of the head honchos realized they had a huge way of controlling how ethnic minorities should perceive themselves because of this fetishization, all the while it was being reinforced in said ethnic minorities because subconscious colorism was being conditioned into them among their own because of it. And that makes the bourgeoisie's job of making sure that we're all divided up as possible significantly easier. So us black folk eventually see the ad with the light-skinned model. Some of us see it as inspiration and aspiration, regardless of how much melanin is present, black excellence and all that jazz. But it can also make the dark-skinned individuals insecure and experience self-hatred because they'll never know the attention and self-worth that would have been granted to them if they were a black person with lighter skin. They might even get more resentful toward other light-skinned black folk because of it, or believing that lighter skin, even among their own community, is the epitome of black beauty and likability. So now not only are the black communities and other communities of color this happens to further separated, but securing white comfortability via the model in question has been successfully prioritized and achieved. The thing is that now that said bourgeoisie has seen how effective this sense of control is thanks to the evolution of tall, dark, and handsome and the rise of capitalistic racial ambiguity, especially now that more liberal white individuals are more keen to not see colors nowadays than before. They don't mind it when the whole light skin is closer to whiteness and is more palatable strategy is applied to traditionally dark-skinned black characters and figures that have successfully affected more than just the black and brown populace of pop culture. The casting of Aaron Pierre as the Green Lantern John Stewart is a good example of this. Now you see why I'm wearing green. The character was always depicted as a dark-skinned black man, even upon his initial creation by white creative Neil Adams in the 1970s, and has been done so across every animated series, movie, and comic he was in to date. Even in the live-action movie Ryan Reynolds constantly makes millions on by officially saying that he hates he made it. Like, say what you will about George Clooney's Bruce Wayne, but at least he's not rubbing him regretting taking the role in our faces. Jesus Christ, Ryan Reynolds, shut the fuck up! And while Aaron Pierre's performance in Rebel Ridge definitely shows he had what it takes to play the character and do his military background all the justice in the world, the same couldn't be said of his skin tone. But he was cast anyway, being one of James Gunn's favorites back when he opened his all races welcome casting for Adam Warlock when shooting Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 for Marvel Studios. Now, is it fair to say that James Gunn has also been conditioned as a white man growing up in America to believe light skin to be the most tolerable of African American skin tones? I don't think so. After all, he's done comic-accurate skin type casting in the new DCU already, in the form of Mr. Terrific in 2025 Superman, casting Eddie Gathegi as the super genius. Hell, he even race-swapped Perry White again and Luther's henchman Otis. Ooh, and don't even get me started on Chuck Woodie's high evolutionary bitch.
You must stop, for God's sake!
There is no God! That's why I stepped in!
In all honesty, taking all of that into consideration kind of put me in the mind that James Gunn's decision to cast Aaron Pierre as Jon Stewart from his point of view was honestly a case of how Halle Bailey got cast as Ariel. She was the best one that auditioned. And maybe the fact that Aaron Pierre is British and British actors are traditionally cheaper than American actors. But you know, the first point is more than likely also true. But at the same time, we also have to take into consideration the population factor in regards to Jon Stewart and Mr. Terrific, especially when it comes to the versions of media that exposes people to the superhero genre the most: film and television. Not comic books, but film and television. For the majority of us, we watch a movie or see a television show with a new superhero in it that interests us, learn that more of their stories are told in the form of comic books, and then grow an interest in them if time and money allow. And the industry banks on that curiosity and desire to get you into buying the medium that the genre started in the first place. MMO video games like Fortnite, Marvel Rivals, and Multiverses, rest in peace, have also been helping a lot of people's first experiences with well-established superheroes and pop culture figures worldwide be through video gaming. At this point, catching up to the whole reason why Marvel Studios was founded in the first place. So in that regard, Jon Stewart, who had become more popular than the original Silver Age Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, thanks to the animated syndicated television series Justice League, was a way more popular character than Mr. Terrific, despite being just as black as he was. Jon Stewart being featured in more mainstream media than other black DC superheroes kinda made him the poster boy for them, until the decision to give Black Lightning the same treatment was made. You know, because Warner Brothers execs really thought that we weren't gonna be watching Static Shock. Sure, Jan. The reason why James Gunn's possibly innocent decision to cast Aaron Pierre does more harm than good in this situation is because it perpetuates that in order to present these now established characters that matter so much in regards to the likes of representation thanks to their newfound popularity in the mainstream, the ones portraying them also have to cater to a specific breed of white people who would find their dark-skinned presences either intimidating or capable of deflating their so-called valuable ego. Yes, Halle Berry was an obvious rising star in the late 90s, thanks to films like Boomerang, Losing Isaiah, and The Flintstones. But part of the reason why she was cast as Aurora Monroe, aka Storm, in the Fox-Men movies is because her skin tone allowed her to cater to the sensibility of white folk. She was the hottest name on the lips of Hollywood at the time, according to the casting director, which tells me she might have been taken advantage of back in the day for the sake of her career. Meanwhile, Angela Bassett, the one that was originally up for the role, and that everyone unanimously agreed should have actually had the role, has been in the game long enough to know how to reclaim your anatomy from the system and keep their grimy, greedy little paws off of it. Because when she said she didn't take the role because she didn't think superhero movies were popular at the time, I knew she wasn't really real about that. And it's not because she played Queen Mother either. At this point, I just think that Auntie knew that Fox was going to be on that bullshit from jump. Especially after finding out how dirty they did Holly to get her back for Days of Future Past. No, they went with Holly because she was a new rising star who didn't know what Hollywood was capable of, and, most of all, light-skinned. Yes, she's talented. Yes, she has done the work. Yes, she absolutely, actually deserves to be there. But she's also serving 90s body tea and is light-skinned. Allowing a black woman to play such a pillar in black pop culture that means so much to others a la representation, while also catering to the white folks' tall, dark, and handsome fetish, men and women alike, in a non-ego threatening way. So now that Jon Stewart is close to that same level of popularity, there was always a chance that either movie studios, personal biases, or thousands of years of racial and stereotypical conditioning would cause this casting to be treated with this same sensitivity bias. That's part of the reason the character was cut out of both the theatrical cut of the DCEU Justice League movie and the Zack Snyder cut. Warner Brothers execs who prefer checks over cinema via at the time DC Films head Walter Hamada acknowledged the popularity of Jon Stewart gained from the animated series, and didn't want dark-skinned Wayne T. Carr, the actor Zack Snyder cast as Jon Stewart in the Snyder Cut, to be locked into a contract to play him in future ensemble and solo projects. Because just like Storm's popularity and portrayal before him, and to paraphrase my previous example, if a character has to be portrayed as black, then according to all of these factors, he should be a shade of black that doesn't immediately make them, white people, feel uncomfortable, threatened, or inferior. In the case of Aaron Pierre, especially when it comes to his sudden appeal to male white fans of his after Rebel Ridge in a way that can possibly rival that of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, whiteness is comfortable with having him in its presence without him threatening them thanks to his lighter skin. And because of this, they can use his natural talent as an actor, his charisma as a male action star on the rise to cater to both men and women, and his pro-black pride to hide behind if anyone questions the decisions to make him portray a traditionally dark-skinned character. Meanwhile, those who don't know any better or have no clue how much the black community has mentally suffered from whiteness injecting colorism into our bloodstream when it comes to seeing the image they think is worthy of us versus the importance of seeing us be darker than a Werther's caramel, watch us critique and can't understand why we're complaining, because to them, light-skinned or not, black is black. Because let me guess, we all look alike. Light-skinned black folk cater to the world's love of ethnically diverse and racially ambiguous features without having to acknowledge the blackness within. It's tall, dark, and handsome, but instead of just referencing a non-British white man with a healthy bronze tan, they're also giving the offspring of the enslaved women they sexually assaulted a slightly altered version of the same privilege. Because come on now, at the end of the day, you're still black, don't get it twisted. Now, thanks to this privilege, light-skinned black men have become the ideal depiction of one desired by the hearts and minds of the world thanks to American marketing. They become the beauty standard for men's health and likability, an industry that's always used white envy to gain its black clientele. They become the rebel/bad boy heartthrobs for media traditionally catered towards straight white women, sometimes doing battle against the traditionally white standard love interest. And they become the face of a character that can finally be liked and marketable across the country because white folks' own degradation and stereotyping of dark skin over the course of the years has etched the myth in stone that lighter African Americans will always be more desirable. I need everyone watching this video that is my shade or darker to believe me when I say that this is not true. As an individual who has suffered from feeling bad that I was born black from a tween to a young adult, I completely understand what it feels like to have your confidence lack to the point where it's the equivalent of a disability. But you cannot let white supremacy make you believe that you are wanted, desired, or favored any less than your light-skinned counterpart. It only did what it did to light-skinned black folk because white supremacy will always be too chicken shit to properly see what you're all about. And they especially want to know what makes you special all on your own. And they want to know that because if they do, they will destroy it right in front of you. But that also means you have to understand that our light-skinned brothers and sisters are suffering from this white fetishization and are being affected by it in ways that are just as toxic and incredibly dangerous to their well-being. Unless one is specifically trying to ride on the coattails of white supremacy and capitalism, they are also not to blame for why the colorist divide between us is there. We can't let this infighting that was spawned by white supremacy and capitalism further separate us in a way that keeps us poor and working class as a whole from organizing as quickly as South Korea did when their president tried to enforce martial law. And it's all because some white women got horny. And it's because some white women got horny without wanting to be seen like the white woman from Birth of a Nation. White men forced the whole world to look at certain black folk and people of color in a very specific light. So, if we're going to show the world that black is truly beautiful, we gotta do more than just take out the light bulb. We gotta toss the goddamn lamp.